Hello everyone, this is lesson 8.6 on factoring. So we've already learned how to factor a quadratic equation where the leading coefficient, the a, is just 1. It gets a little bit more complicated when it's not 1 because, for example, say you had 2x squared. Well, when you put it in the parentheses, if you put x here and x here, that gives you x squared, not 2x squared. So there's a method that we can use for factoring quadratic equations where the leading coefficient is something other than 1, and that's called the AC method. So this lesson will teach you how to use that so that we can factor all quadratic equations. So a few warm-up questions here. To find the product of 3c plus 3 times 2c minus 3, we would use FOIL. And notice that the first terms are not just c, but they're 3c and 2c. Okay, so when we FOIL, first, outer, inner, last, you would get 6c squared minus 9c plus 6c, and then minus 9. And then if you combine your like terms, that would be negative 3c, so 6c squared minus 3c minus 9. All right, so what we're going to do today is learn how we can get an equation from here back to here in factored form. So notice that this is 6c squared, so the numbers that we used were 3c and 2c. Or we could have done 6c and 1c. It just depends on what your other coefficients are. So in step 2, if we want to solve the equation, so this is finding the product where we FOIL, and this is solving the equation where we set each factor equal to 0. So we would do 2c plus 3 equals 0, and 2c plus 1 equals 0, and solve both two-step equations. So it would be 2c equals negative 3, c equals negative 3 halves. This would be 2c equals negative 1, and c equals negative 1 half. Okay, so make sure that you're paying attention to the directions. Here, if you FOILed, you would get the wrong answer because we're not FOILing, we're just solving. If you FOILed it, then if you want to solve it, then you want it to be in factored form like that. All right, and then this is just a review problem of the velocity equation, or the vertical motion equation. If a cat leaps into the air with an initial velocity of 12 feet per second, we'll use this equation to find the zeros of the function. So here we would do h equals negative 16t squared, that part will always stay the same, plus v stands for the initial velocity, which is 12, and then s stands for the initial height, but the cat assumingly jumps from the ground, so the initial height is 0. Right, so if we wanted to solve this equation, we would have to factor it and set it equal to 0, because when it lands back on the ground, then the height is 0 again. So we'll say 0 equals, and then what we can factor out of here, first we would factor out the negative sign because there's a negative in front, and then the greatest common factor of 16 and 12 would be 4. We could also factor out a t. So we'll do negative 4t, and then we get what's left in parentheses by dividing both of these by negative 4t. So this would be just 4t then, and then this sign would flip to minus 3. All right, so if we want to then find the zeros, this part would give us t equals 0. That's just the initial time. That's just saying at the beginning the cat was on the ground, and then it jumped into the air. And then this one, if we solve this, we would get t equals 3 over 4, add 3 divided by 4. So that's saying that after 0.75 or after 3/4 of a second, the cat is back on the ground. So the way this equation looks then, a diagram would be like going up and then coming back down. So we drew an x and y axis. This part would be 0, and this part would be 0.75. And then to find the maximum height, remember that the maximum height occurs halfway between the zeros. So halfway between the zeros would be, what's 0.75 divided by 2? 0.375. So halfway between the zeros is when the maximum height occurs. And then if we wanted to find the maximum height, we would plug 0.375 into the t in our equation here. All right, I'm kind of running out of room here. So you would do negative 16 times 0.375 squared plus 12 times 0.375. I'm going to plug that into my calculator. And you would get 2.25 feet. And that makes sense. The cat shouldn't be jumping too high, right? It's just a cat, so not a kangaroo or something. All right, so let's get to the problems here. Actually, hold on a second. Okay, I neglected to write down the actual equations. All right, so let's say when the a is -1, then we would have negative y squared plus 2y plus 8. So here's our first example. So if the leading coefficient is just -1, all we need to do is just factor out a negative sign and then factor it like you did yesterday. So we'll do negative, and then we'll flip the signs, y squared minus 2y minus 8. And then make sure you keep the negative. So we'll put it into its factors. We'll have y in the first position. And then what are multiples of 8 that would add to -2? And remember, since it's -8, that means one of the numbers is going to be positive, one will be negative. So these are the only factors of 8. So it's obviously going to be this one. And since we want -2 in the middle, we're going to make our bigger factor negative, because positive 2 minus 4 will give us a -2. So we'll do plus 2 minus 4. Okay, so we'll just do one more example for this one. Let's do this one here. So negative a squared plus 12a minus 27, factor out a negative. So you have a squared minus 12a plus 27. If you flip the signs, and I'm going to break it into its factors. So a will be the first number. And then what are factors of 27 that add to -12? Since it's positive 27, that means both numbers are going to be negative to get to -12. So would 3 and 9 work? That's factor of 27. Yes, and they're both going to be negative. So -3, -9. All right, so let's learn the AC method. So we're going to do the AC method using hold on, guys. I think I opened the wrong notebook. All right, here we go. So we're going to use the AC method with the equation from the number one's warm-up question. So it was 6c squared minus 3c minus 9. All right, so the AC method, here are the steps. Make sure you write them down. The first step is to find AC. That means the coefficient of A times the coefficient of C. In our case, that is 6 and -9. Okay, so step 1 is to multiply 6 times -9. That's going to give us -72. Okay, the second step is to find factors, not factors of -9 that add to -3, but factors of -72 that add to -3. So let's find the factors of -72. They're 1 is 72, obviously, 2 and 36. That's not going to work. And I'm just going to do, on my calculator, I'm going to divide by the numbers. 72 is divisible by 3. That gives us 24. Let's check 72 divisible by 4. That's 18. 72 divided by 6. Obviously not divisible by 5, but 6 gives us 12. That's not going to combine to -3. How about 72 divided by 8? That gives us 9. Wait a minute. 6 times 9. Okay. Okay. All right, you guys. Sorry, there was a little hiccup in the video. So I started it when I cut some of the middle part. So, anyways, we're gonna use the example that was from the warm-up question. 6c squared minus 3c minus 9 was the answer to it, and we're gonna try to learn how to get it back into the factored form. So the first step is to find a times c. That's why it's called the AC method. So that's an easy way to remember what you're supposed to do first. So a times c means 6 times negative 9. That's the a, and that's the c. Okay, so 6 times negative 9 gives us negative 54. And then the second step is to find factors of that answer that you just found that add to negative 3. So you can write down the factors of 54 and figure out which one it would be. But, I mean, if you just look at the numbers that you got to get negative 54, they do add up to get negative 3. So that's not always going to happen, but in this case it did. So we're going to choose 6 and negative 9. And that the signs also work because 6 plus negative 9 gives us negative 3. All right, now step 3 is to rewrite your equation, except we're going to break up the middle terms into these two factors. So now we're going to do 6c squared and then plus 6c, because that was, now we're going to break negative 3c up. We're going to break this up into 6c and negative 9c. Okay, so we're going to do 6c squared minus 9c, 6c minus 9c minus 9. It doesn't matter the order that you put them in. It might be helpful to write the ones that have similar factors, I guess. So I combined the 6's and I combined the 9's. So I wrote, but you could flip this around and say negative 9c plus 6c. All right, so then we're going to factor using two groups. So we're going to break this up into 6c squared plus 6c and negative 9c minus 9. So I'm going to factor this binomial and this binomial. So if I factor this, I can factor out a 6c, and then I'm left with c plus 1. And here, I would factor out negative 9, so minus 9, and then times c, and then it's not minus 1 anymore, but it's plus 1 because we factored out the negative. All right, so now at this point, you should notice that the same thing in parentheses here is the same thing in parentheses here. That is supposed to happen. If that doesn't happen, then you know you did something wrong, or you factored wrong, or you found the wrong numbers up here. Next thing we're going to do is factor by grouping. So if you have a similar group, c plus 1 times c plus 1, for both of these factors, then you can factor out the c plus 1, and in parentheses, we write what's left. So after you factor out the c plus 1, we're going to cross it off so you can see what's left. You have 6c here, and then you have negative 9 here. All right, so I know that doesn't look exactly like it did in number 1, but it is similar. The reason it doesn't is because we, why doesn't it look the same? There's probably just more than one way that we could write this. So for example, if you did flip these around, then it would look like number 1's example. So if you did 6c squared minus 9c plus 6c minus 9, then here you would pull out a 3c, and you're left with 2c minus 3. Here you'd pull out a 3 again, and you're left with 2c minus 3. And then it factors into 2c minus 3 times 3c plus 2, and that looks like it does a number 1. So both of these answers are actually correct. I will make sure that I avoid situations like that where it could be more than one answer. But anyways, let's do a couple more practice questions to get you more confident. So for this question, the first step, the leading coefficient is not 1, so we would use AC method. So find AC would be 3 times negative 5, so negative 15. Then we find factors of negative 15 that add to positive 14. So that's going to be 15c, so well, I'm going to use n, and negative 1n. Because 1 and 15 do count as a factor of 15. In this case, that works to get 14. And also one of the numbers is going to be negative because we have negative 15. All right, so then the second step is to break up your middle term. So we're going to rewrite this equation, 3n squared, but instead of 14n, I'm going to rewrite it as 15n minus 1n. Or what I like to do is I actually like to write the negative number first, so negative 1n plus 15n. That way we don't have to worry about factoring out a negative when we do the factor by grouping. And then the minus 5 at the end. All right, so then you break it up into two groups. Here, I can only factor out an n, and I have 3n minus 1 left over. Here, I can factor out a 5. So what's important here is to do not just 5, but plus 5, because you want it to be separated by addition or subtraction if there was a negative here. And then you're left with 3n minus 1. It stays minus 1 because we didn't factor out a negative here for the 5. So minus 1. And also you should see 3n minus 1, 3n minus 1. We can pull that parentheses out in front and then write what's left, n plus 5. You may also write this. This is equivalent to n plus 5 times 3n minus 1. It's the same thing. You can just flip these two around. Multiplication is can do that. All right, we'll do a few more examples here. So here I'm going to find AC would be 4 times 5, which is 20. And then I want factors of 20 that add to negative 9. So that would be 1 and 20, 2 and 10, or 4 and 5. And I'm going to pick 4 and 5, but the signs will both be negative because we have plus here, but a negative here. So negative, negative. All right, now I'm going to rewrite my middle term. So we'll do 4s squared minus 4s, and then minus 5s plus 5. So here in this group, I can factor out a 4s, and I'm left with s minus 1. Here I would factor out a 5, but not just a 5, a negative 5. And then I'm left with c, and then this sign flips to negative, and then this just becomes 1 because I pulled the whole 5 out. Oh, s, I'm sorry, I keep thinking c. All right, so now I'm gonna pull out sorry guys, this is a 1. I said that, but I wrote down a 5. So now I'm gonna pull out the s minus 1, and then times 4s minus 5. And I believe if you did this the other way, like if you wrote negative 4s and 5s, I believe you would get the same thing here. Okay, let's see how many more examples there are. Let's do an example where there's a negative sign in front. So here, if you have a negative sign in front, then the first step, you can do it without pulling it out, but what I like to do often is to pull out the negative sign, and I'll show you 2 ways, and then that'll be the end of this video. We'll do 2 parts to this lesson. So I pull out the negative sign and I flip the other signs. The only thing to beware is to make sure that you don't drop the negative sign in your final answer, because that's what a lot of people do. All right, so AC would be 4 times negative 7, so negative 28. Factors of 28 that add to 12. Let's see, 2 and 14, that would work. And I want the 14 to be negative and the 2 to be positive to give me negative 12. So then I'm going to rewrite this equation and split the middle term up. So I'm going to do the negative. I'm going to say 4x squared. Which one do I want to put first? I am going to go ahead and put the negative 14 first because it's negative and I want to write the negative 1 first. Not that it matters too much, but you just got to be careful. And then minus 7. And this will actually be a good learning experience. Okay, so then I'm going to factor by grouping. And at this point, I'm going to use brackets here. Okay, so in this group, I can factor out a 2x, and I'm left with 2x minus 7. Now look at 2x minus 7 here. I can't factor anything out. So if you can't factor anything out, factor out a 1. So I'm going to say plus 1 times 2x minus 7, and actually write the 1 there. Because when you pull out the 2x minus 7, what's left then will be 2x plus 1. And at this point, you don't really need the brackets. You can get rid of those. All right, and then I'll show you one other way to do this question. What if, say, for example, you didn't factor out the negative? You could still do it fine. You would just have negative 4 times 7, negative 28. Wait a second. Okay, and then factors of negative 28 that add to positive 12 would be 2. All right, so our last example is going to be negative 4x squared plus 12x plus 7. So there are 2 ways to do this. The first way is you could factor out a negative. So you do negative 4x squared Okay, so the second way to do this is if you did not factor out the negative and you wrote AC is still negative 28, but now you're trying to find factors of negative 28 that add to 12. So in that case, you're going to do negative 2 and positive 14 instead of positive 2 and negative 14. So you would have negative 4x squared minus 2x plus 14x plus 7. Right, so split it up into your 2 groups. Here I can factor out negative 2x and write 2x minus 1. And then here I can factor out a 7 and write 2x. This would be plus 1 because we factored out the negative and the sign flipped, because this is plus 1. Okay, then I would factor out the 2x plus 1, and then this would be negative 2x plus 7. Okay, so what I had on the other slide is the same thing, it's just the signs are flipped around. All right, either of those would be equivalent. All right, so I'm going to leave it at that. We do have some other examples and word problems that I'm just going to put in tomorrow's video because I don't want to make this one too long. All right, so that is the end of this lesson. You guys have a great day.